Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am really excited to be joined today by James Anney, my colleague here. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to join in, and then we will go ahead and get started. As always, this is recorded, so if you want to take notes, great. But if not, you will get a copy of the recording and a copy of the slides as well. I think you're going to want them. I looked at them last night. This is going to be a value-packed webinar. So I'm really excited for y'all to join us. If you're watching live with us, just know that I am monitoring the Q&A and the chat. So if you have any questions as we go, feel free to drop those in there, and I'll be sure to get those answered while we are live on the webinar. But let's go ahead and dive in. So today's webinar topic is wondering what's next for your business. Maybe you are. A lot of people are at this phase of the year. We're starting to think about 2025 planning and what that means and what that potentially could look like, and just really doing an audit of the year and deciding what 2025 might hold for us. So I'm excited to talk about strategic growth and economic value creation for small businesses with James. First, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Hannah Hood. I am a virtual CFO, and I'm also a senior resource manager here with the firm. I help with these creative agency webinars. I would like to mention too, if you are watching because you are looking for CPE credit, this is not a CPE eligible webinar, but I would encourage you to go download Earmark and get CPE for that, but you will not get that for this webinar. Sometimes we get that question, so I just wanted to address that up front. I wanted to also give you all a little bit of background about the timeline of our firm and where we got here and why we do what we do. In 2002, Jody Grundon and Adam Hale, who you see in the picture respectively, started as a traditional CPA firm as Summit CPAs. And in 2004, they started offering CFO and back office accounting services. I really feel like they were pioneers in this space because this was ahead of the advisory wave that we are all riding in this accounting industry right now. In 2013, we became a fully distributed firm, again, ahead of that remote working wave. And then in 2022, we joined Anders CPAs and Advisors, which is a regional accounting firm out of St. Louis. And so we now have a hybrid team, and we have rebranded ourselves as Summit Virtual CFO by Anders. So that's been a bit of our journey to get where we are today. Like I said earlier, I am joined by my colleague, James Anney, and thank you, James, for joining me today. I already know that this is going to be a whole lot of fun, and you're going to take us on a really fun journey, but I'd love for you to take a second and introduce yourself before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am James Anney. I am, just you can tell from the background, I live just north of Indianapolis, Indiana, and I have been with Anders for, man, it feels like forever, but it probably has not been forever. But my background prior to this was I worked for large companies that were international, and I felt that there was always something missing. I always liked the entrepreneurial spark that you see in small business. Issues a little bit different, which is kind of cool, and it's been a real thrill ride. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. I'm excited. Yeah, because of your background, I feel like I've learned so much from you as well. So I'm excited for our audience to hear from you and to just see what they can take away from this. So when you're ready, we can go ahead and dive in.
Absolutely. It's just where I say I didn't know there would be a quiz, right? So enough about me, right? Rolling on to the deal. So I think that the picture, and I have no idea where this came from, right? But it's kind of a scary shot if this was somebody's backyard. But when we think about a small business, right, we really don't know what's next. So from a truth or fiction standpoint, the road to success may not even be a road. And I think that's very true, right? If we're a small business owner, we really have no idea what's around the corner, right? We don't even know if there's a corner sitting out there in the picture. We don't know if there's a dirt road that this suddenly takes into. So there's really a lot of uncertainty that goes with it. And then we talk about business being unpredictable, absolutely a truth. And there's no clear map to guide us. And we can read a lot of material. There's a lot of literature out there on how to start a business, how to run a business, how to scale a business, how to exit a business. But there's really no clear map unless you sit down and read them all that really definitively says this is how it goes. So there's a lot of unpredictability, a lot of uncertainty. I like that customers are not always visible, right? We may think what our customers are going to look like and what they're looking for, but the reality may be completely different. And what we're really going to focus on today is that journey, as Hannah kind of started us out with. It's the journey from where we're standing now to, and again, I'm looking at it from an exit, but it can also be the incremental economic value. So getting around that next corner, that long lens, that strategic viewpoint is going to be critical to how we get there.
It's critical for also not feeling like you're on a roller coaster because I'm just like you're saying, like the path is not always a road. I think a lot of business owners, especially ones that I work with, feel like you're right. It's not a road, it's a track to a roller coaster that I feel like I can't get off. So this is truly, I feel like, the key towards getting to the place where you feel like you're on solid ground again at the very least and can start to map that out.
Yep. And just for some definitions to start us off, our focus here, our market, if you will, is really the small business. So it's between 1 million and 25 million. We're not going to be playing in the backyard of the medium-sized business, 25 to 100, or a large business of over 100 million. A lot of the issues are going to be similar. Right. The types of things that you see in large business also happen in small business, but the sophistication changes and a lot of the specific issues in here, we kind of cut those out and we've chosen not to talk about them as we really refine that market niche. Right. And then we get into the business life cycle. So again, this is if we were to start a business, all the pieces around the wheel. So there's that launch phase, right? And that's where we bring out the business, we launch it to the marketplace, and we set about trying to make this thing work, right? Viability is key. And then we start to experience some growth to say, yep, this thing's stable. We're going to be able to move with it. Then comes that growth phase. And this is where there's rapid increase in the revenue side. We're expanding our product offerings. We're expanding our market reach. So if we just pause and look at those two in isolation, that's most of the conversation will be somewhere between launch and growth, right? When we have a launch, which generally, if they're a small entity, it could be an individual, right? The owner is going to be wearing a lot of hats and they're going to be doing most of the things, right? But to be able to hit that growth phase, to be able to scale the business, they're going to need a team and they're going to need processes documented, and they're going to need a very clear roadmap, and they're going to need cash, right, in order to get there. Because when we talk about expanding into a separate market or a new product offering, those things require cash. And then once you get past the growth phase and you've been successful up to this point, then comes the shakeout phase. The competition starts to increase a little bit there. This is where we become more cost focused as a provider, and there's market consolidation can take place, which also kind of rolls into the exit that we're going to talk about. From there, we roll to maturity, and the value starts to fall off, if you will, and then finally in decline. So we'll stay clear of the whole shakeout, maturity, and decline, and focus more, again, on the launch and on the growth phase. And notice there's different strategies for getting through each one, right? What we do in the launch mode may not be what we do in growth, and what works in growth may not work in launch. So we have to be able to navigate those pieces. All right. So here's the start of our journey, right? We are up in the upper left where that little U are here, right? We've got our road, we've got our classic VW bus, right? And we're driving down the road that is visible to us at this time, right? And we're driving towards the mountain. We've got at the summit of the mountain, we have incremental economic value. So that's our goal. If we think about why we started a business, it was to provide a service. We found something that we could do it very well. But ultimately, we have to start thinking about what's next. Is that going to be an exit? Is it going to be some transfer to somebody internal to within the business? But ultimately, it's about building incremental economic value, which could lead to our exit as well. And across the way, we're going to have a couple different stopping points where we look at some tools that we can leverage throughout the journey. So I decided to start with exit readiness, right? We start with the end in mind, because this is really going to help sharpen our focus, right? So we're talking about these discussions lead to a clear focus on the next 3 years. And I like 3 years because 1 year really doesn't get you very far. But if you look out 3 years, you can have much clearer focus. And I liken this to so Hannah, if I were to task you with learning Italian, right? Mm-hmm. You need to learn the Italian language. There may be some reluctance, some resistance to getting into it, but this may be one of our annual goals that we have out there, but we really never achieve it. But if we can match that goal with, you need to learn Italian because next year you're going to Italy and you want to be able to be somewhat conversant when you're there to, enhance the experience of being in Italy, Now you've understood the why, and there's increased focus on this is why I need to learn Italian, and I may be able to really focus and get more dialed into it. And we see the same
Mhm.
thing with business. If we think about, especially when we get to our point where we're talking about strategic plans and forecast in the out periods, it's very easy to say, I'm just going to increase my revenue by 10%. I'll try to keep my costs flat. And then whatever happens, happens. And we'll replicate that in years 2 and 3 as well. But we really haven't addressed the big issue, which is, where do I want to be in 3 to 5 years? And once I know that, then that clarity that it provides me is something now I can shoot for and really build a solution that helps me achieve that. So when we jump forward,
So
little ex-
have you ever encountered like asking these questions to someone and them not being able to give you that clarity and it just feeling really fuzzy for them? Because I feel like I have, at least in the past, run into that somewhat, of just like it's just very broad, it's not super clear, it's very gray, it could be this, it could be that. Like, how do you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question because that's what we'll typically hear is, I don't know what's going to happen next week, and you're asking me to go out 3 years,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a couple ways to address that. The first one is, when you build a budget based on drivers, these are things that we do know, and look at our little box of assumptions there, right? So we definitely know what assumptions are out there, and we can make assumptions throughout the period, and then our assumptions may or may not prove to be wrong. And this is really the fun part of the space that we play in, because we're not reconciling bank accounts, right? Where we have to have that precision of is the number 3 or is it 4? We're dealing in a world of assumptions, and then those assumptions have financial outcomes associated with them. So, to get somebody, because I've had the conversation of let's start looking at it 3 years, and it's like, man, I don't know where I'll be. And that's cool. That's all part of the game. But if we can help them say what assumptions do we want to make about the first year? What assumptions about the second year? And also this whole strategy of going in through exit readiness puts them in a better position to understand it, right?
Hmm.
So in our example, we have a 3-owner firm. The first owner is an 80% owner. So they're going to be the majority person. I'm going to focus more on what their number is. And we would start by asking the question of what would it take in dollars for you to exit the business? So in this case, owner one said it would take $5 million for me to walk away. Fair enough. They're an 80% owner, which means they will keep 80% of the exit dollars. And so that would derive, we need an exit number of like 6.3. I'm going to round up, right? This is the assumptions and being very wild with our assumptions here. And we don't take into consideration fees or taxes. This is more of, it's a conversation starter. We want to get the conversation going with the individual. So we know we need at least 6.3 million to exit. Most businesses, when they exit, again, when they're sold, there's going to be some multiplier that is based on EBITDA. So earnings before interest, expense, tax, depreciation, and amortization. The multiplier is going to vary across industries, right? So every industry, you can go and look up a value that says businesses typically exchange hands at this multiple, right? Could be a 3 multiplier, which means EBITDA times 3. It could be a 7, in our example, a multiplier of 7. What we'll note is if we're going to have a multiple of 3, if that's kind of the industry average, and we don't have a lot of those extra value adds as a business, we need a higher EBITDA. So in that case, we'd need an EBITDA of close to 2.1 million. I use about a 3-year average, but again, every buyer is going to be different on what their expectations are.
Hmm.
So what that means is if you have an EBITDA of $2.1 million and it's a 3 multiple, you'll get your $6.3 million, right? But then we can look at our own business and say, what is our EBITDA and historically, what has it been? And then going forward, what might it be? And we find out we can't sell, right? That's based on our box of assumptions. So then if we go to the other extreme and say, well, what if it was a 7x multiple, right? And that says we need an EBITDA of closer to 900,000. So in this example, based on our box of assumptions, we can't sell in the business in 26 or 27, but potentially we could in 28. So that gives us a runway that now we can use to say these are things that, gives us time to build that business out and do some things to make it better. Now, it also can do, if we can change our EBITDA based, again, this is based on current assumptions. But if we can extend our EBITDA from 900,000 to 1.2 million, right, then it's going to be a higher valuation, and we're going to get there quicker. So this says, we're holding the multiplier as the constant here. What this exercise does then at the end is it tells the business owner, if my EBITDA is only 900,000, then I'm going to need a 7x multiplier in order to get what I want. But if it's a 3 multiplier, right, then it's going to be closer to 2.7, and that's well short of what I'm looking for. So this is that motivator to say, what are we going to do differently to get there? And then you can even, quick math and back into it. And if you say you're looking at, depending on what industry you're in, if your net income or your EBITDA is about 20% of earnings, you can figure out what your top line needs to be. And you can very quickly back into what some of the specifics would look like as we go forward. Now, again, we don't have the clarity to know exactly what the numbers should be, but we're talking about, a big number in terms of assumptions. We're taking a lot of liberties, but we're documenting them so we can see whether or not they fall through or not. But this is a great starting exercise, because now we at least understand if we want to get where we need to be, then we're going to have to run the business through some significant changes in the short term to help us get there.
This may be a really sobering exercise for a lot of people who have this idea in mind that they think they can sell in 3 years, but then the reality of what that actually looks like is more like 5 or more years.
I'll tell you what it typically is, because it stands to reason. I mean, you haven't really thought about selling a business, right? Most people don't get into the business to sell it, but once they start facing that, they like this number, but then you realize it's like what we're doing right now is not going to get us to that number. So it's the light bulb goes on, and suddenly everybody's a lot more connected.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in our little bus here. We've kind of started to pull away. We've got the GTM, right? Go-to-market strategy. That's sitting out there, and that'll be our first checkpoint as we go down there. So go-to-market strategy, again, why is a CPA talking about go-to-market strategy? I think this one's critical for all aspects of a business, and everything that we do really drives around that, especially in the early phases, right? So, the ones I want to focus on is when we think of a go-to-market strategy at the very early onset, it's about getting the product and the market aligned so that we can have a product that sells. Fair enough. But it also aligns all the departments towards that. And so there's a clarity in communication that results from this strategy that really helps drive this thing forward, right? So this is my little short form go-to-market checklist. And we'll start at the top left there, market. And again, when you start a business, this was your first conversation, right? What high pain problem will our solution resolve in the marketplace? And if that wasn't the first conversation, it ought to be in the early ones, right? But that's what we're looking for, is there's a market out there that has a problem. And in order for us to have success, it has to be a high pain problem. It can't be a minor problem. It has to be something that's significant. The second question, which we often overlook, or can overlook if we're not careful, is the market willing to pay for our solution? So we may have a great solution to a high pain problem, but the market isn't willing to pay for it. Therefore, we're not really going to have a lot of success. And the more refined we can get in the market, the better off we're going to be in terms of as we move forward to get product market fit. And that's where we did our definitions. We said we're dealing with small business. That's where we refined our market to get a little bit more granular. And as you go through this process, you'll refine your market even more in order to make sure that you're putting your focus on one particular aspect that you're trying to achieve. On the product side, now we're looking back at our product. What is our UVP, right? The unique value proposition. What makes our product very unique in terms of the competition? And that's what we have to figure out and then elevate through the marketing message that we get out. And then the second comment there goes to product market fit. And this is one that I think it's a fascinating topic. There's been a lot written on it. One of the things that they talk about is you can use metrics and KPI to really drive to understanding what your product market fit. And that's the point where the product that you're selling into the market that you're targeting is fully aligned. And you can start to see product market fit when you're looking at your metrics, because the cost of, or the customer acquisition cost starts to decline. So the churn could be minimized, but there are a lot of metrics out there, a lot of them focusing on the e-com world, that starts to suggest that you've reached product market fit, because everything, just all the flywheel starts going, the effort that you're putting in is generating more sales. than you had before. So it's like now there's a good fit. Our product is well targeted to our market. Sometimes you may find, because it's an iterative process, that what you thought was going to be the market was not in fact the market, or the product that you had was a great idea, but it just didn't fit into the market, and we have to kind of pivot and move. So I mentioned customer acquisition cost and lifetime value. Critical in our go-to-market strategy, because this is a way for us to figure out whether or not we're enhancing that value or not, right? And I'll say that there are probably as many different ways to calculate CAC as there are people who would want to calculate it. Everybody's got their own unique brand of it, right? At a very high level, you can use my total marketing and selling expense as X. I divide it by the number of new customers from the marketing side, and then boom, that's my number. Some refine it to just marketing, some do it on heads. I prefer to take more of an incremental approach, and I think the incremental approach allows you to use it not only for determining whether you have product market fit, but also can use it ongoing throughout the business experience. But in short, your customer acquisition this is the cost of acquiring a new customer to the business. So when the business first launches, you've got a product, but nobody really knows about it. You're going to be spending more marketing dollars at that point to generate a following. As the product starts to take hold, that number would expect to drop down. The lifetime value is the revenue and margin that we expect to collect from a customer over the lifetime of that relationship. And then we can look at the two of those and see whether or not it makes sense or not. So again, it's important to go to market, but it can be used throughout our business. So this example of how we could use it as an ongoing business tool makes a couple of assumptions. The assumptions are in yellow. So we have the opportunity to spend $10,000 to buy, in keeping this close to home, a banner that we're going to fly over a sporting event advertising our product. Okay. So the cost of that is $10,000. Now we expect that we're going to have exposure to 50,000 heads. Cool. So that's 20 cents per number of person to look at it. But what's important to us is not that they understand our brand or our product, but we want a conversion into, now I'm willing to put down money and actually buy something. We decide that our first assumption is going to be 5%. Right. I call that the flex point because we can change that to whatever we want. If 5% of the people who see it convert, that's 2,500 new customers. The widely accepted target for lifetime value and CAC is 3. So that's what you want as a lifetime value, is 3 times the amount of the CAC. So in our case, now we've moved into what does our lifetime value look like? We say the average customer spends $9. There's a 60% margin, so we keep a little over $5 every time they make a purchase. If they make 3 purchases, it's $16. So in this case, if we look to the right, our projected lifetime value to CAC is 4.05. So the multiplier works. It's greater than 3, it's 4. Now we can assess whether or not it makes sense to do it, right? If we look down to the bottom, the required customers, in order to make this worthwhile at 3, we can, instead of having 2,500 new customers, we have 2,000. If instead of converting 5%, you can see the required conversion is 4. So what this would allow us to do as a business is sit down as a team and say, hey, do we have $10,000 to spend on a banner? Yes or no? If we do, what's the value in this? And we can walk through the assumptions. Now, we're not going to know it's truly effective, but we're going to learn something in the process, right? We've said that we're going to convert 5% of the people that witness this. Maybe it's not 5%, maybe it's 4%, then it would be a good spend. Same thing with the lifetime value. We're going to have a better understanding of what our customer looks like. We talk about the ideal customer profile, which will be the next, when we get back to the go-to-market. We're making the assumption that everybody here uniquely fit in, and they were that ideal customer profile. That was this audience was made up of that. So it was our ideal marketing space. So that's an example of where you can use this tool to help your business. And this can be done with conferences. If we go to a trade show, we spend money on a trade show. How many new deals do we land? Does it make sense to do that or not do that based on the spend that they would make as they come out of the pipeline?
And I would say it's incredibly important for this dynamic. Yes, no, are we going to do it part of the conversation? But I think it's also really valuable to reflect back on this post spend as well, yep, just to be sure that that is still in alignment and that the adjustment to those percentages for future spend doesn't need to be taken into consideration.
Right. And there are things you can do as a business to tag those. How did you hear about it? You can use a QR code for that specific event. Um, but it ultimately, it's that building that inventory of knowledge for the business to say whether this made sense or not. Right. And if we look on the upper right, the customer profile, the ideal customer profile, it's understanding that to know in which market we should play. Because the more refined we can get with ICP also tells us whether or not we're spending our marketing dollars going to the right in the right space, right? We've all received the emails, the text where they're just kind of that blast strategy on getting their messaging out. But the more refined you can make it, now your pipeline is going to reflect that. Ideally, your sales funnel is going to move a little bit smoother. So the rest of the go-to-market strategy really deals with what I would say more traditional marketing space, right? But from the things that'll be important to us as we get launched, we'll start seeing the repetitive nature of them throughout. The other key piece is we often think of go-to-market as it starts out, we do it once, we put it away and congratulate ourselves that we completed it. But it's going to change throughout. So we recommend at least annually readdressing the go-to-market strategy to ensure that nothing is significantly changed, right? What if the ideal customer profile has changed? What if the market has changed significantly? What if the product is now modified? So being able to leverage that into a conversation with the marketing team is critical as we
This
go
is an
forward.
active conversation that I'm having with a client right now, just as we evaluate what our plans are for 2025. Because what they found in 2024, just as this baby organization, is that yes, there's a need. Yes, they serve a pain point, but there is an education piece to their market that they need to take into consideration on the front end of how they sell into who they are trying to target. And we've learned that over 2024. But if we didn't take this intentional moment to identify that, evaluate it, then we would just be going straight into 2025 with the same strategy of thinking that, hey, yes, there's a need. Yes, we can sell into it and just live in this la la land that is not actually ever going to come to fruition for what the reality for who we serve is.
Excellent. All right. See, it's those little moments in the finance world, right, where you're like, hey, we're playing in big business now. This is awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about the go-to-market strategy. The next stop on our journey is our little classic VW bus moves down the road is the business operating system. Right. So of all the things we talk about today, I think this one has it has the ability to have the biggest impact, right? And that's again, everybody is going to have different assumptions on this one, right? Keep using that word. But the business operating system is going to be a critical piece to being able to grow from a small business to a larger business. And it will definitely help achieve the goals that you're laying forward this is where we want to end up. Having a BOS is going to be a critical path to get there. So we typically think there's a couple BOS out there that everybody's familiar with. Most often it's Traction, right? We've heard it as EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, 4DX, Scaling Up. Those are three that most people have had exposure to at one point or the other. So if you've had an implementation of those, awesome. Hopefully you're staying with it. If you are thinking about implementing one of the three, it's a journey. It is a process.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with 4DX. I've worked with EOS. I have a client going through scaling up, and it's a significant lift, right? But at the heart of all those, even if you decide, you know what, those are not for me, I'm going to take more of a generic approach, this hybrid approach. The ideas are all relatively similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the core components there, the first piece of it is always going to be a vision. So the leader of the business needs to have a clear company vision and ensure everybody is aligned with that. And I think that's one that we often overlook, right? As a business leader, they don't understand the business vision, but how well they can articulate that vision to their team is going to be critical because people do better when we understand why. Right. This is why we were, when Hannah was going to learn Italian when she knew she was going to Italy, when suddenly we know what we want to sell the business for, we have that renewed spark to grow the business to meet that target. So understanding the why is a very human element that we need to include. So that's the first piece, getting a clear company vision that everybody's aware with. That can include the core values. So once the business communicates the core values, this is what we stand for as a business. Now that puts us in a position to roll down into the people side, which is putting the right people in the right seats. So a couple of them have the example of the right people on the bus and then in the right seats. Traction, I think, did a really good job of identifying through the people analyzer how to put this into practice. So the first part, getting the right people on the bus, that's where you assess all candidates, existing, new hires, whatever, against the core values and see if they're a core value fit, because these are the people that you want on the team participating in the business. Once you have the group of people set forth as these are people that are culture fits, they're the right people on the right bus. Now we're looking to put them in the right seat. And that's what in Traction they use GWC. Get it, want it, competency to complete it. So the get it part is, do they understand what their particular role is? And if they don't, that's an opportunity to clarify that role. Do they want it? So that's the W. And if they want that role, that's a win. If they don't, that's really not a lot you can do about it. But that helps eliminate where somebody's they're a great culture fit, but they just don't want that particular role. Then you look for another role where they'd be a fit. And finally, on the competency, if they don't have the necessary competency to do it, it could be education, it could be role restructure, whatever that looks like. But by using the core values to make sure they're the right fit, and then the GWC, you can start to build a team that really is locked in on what you're trying to accomplish. So it ties back into vision. And by putting it into the hiring process, you make sure you hire people with the right culture fit and then the right reviews. So it's an extremely valuable tool, People Analyzer. It's, again, from Traction. On the Adapt, it's identifying and solving issues promptly. So this one's critical. More often than not in business, we do a great job of identifying problems. Right? We do clearly, we can name all the things that are wrong, but a good BOS will allow a system to exist where we can now solve them. And the focus is on solving them rather than just identifying them. Documentation, also critical. We talked about that at the beginning as a way to increase your multiplier. When you start the business, you are working as the leader in the business. As you move forward, though, you need to extract yourself from the day-to-day and focus working on the business, right? So then that's the growth strategy. That's the scaling strategy. The more you document the key processes, the more it allows you to extricate yourself from the business, right? And if you want to be able to sell for a higher multiplier, then imagine I'm selling my business, but I'm the only person who can do these 7 key tasks. Now I need to remain with the business. Or the new owner says, well, if you're gone, then how much of that business value erodes with you? And then finally, on the communication, having that meeting cadence, and that could be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on the nature of what we're trying to accomplish. So this is an example of a daily dashboard, completely made up, but just to give us some ideas of what that daily cadence would look like. For companies that truly embrace the whole BOS concept, they would use a daily dashboard with critical KPI to help that teammate understand whether they've won or lost. So in this case, I made up a financial KPI dashboard to things that would be critical to that individual on a daily basis, right? How many KPI metrics would you need? It really depends on the role. It depends on what we're trying to solve for. But this would give them a daily snapshot of whether they've won or lost. On the finance side, it could be how much cash do we have in the bank, right? And that one's on there under current assets. It could be the cash ratio, or it could be, again, there on this one, it's budget and variance analysis, but it's whatever to help that. It could be on the production side, billable hours, right? But it's having that daily metric because now we can address it sooner than later. It could be that some of them roll up into weekly. And I think the firms that have implemented some kind of a business operating system successfully, having that daily dashboard as a way to communicate, this is where our targets are and this is what we're doing. And then they know at the end of the day whether it's a hit or a miss, right?
Mm-hmm. And I would say, even if it's not a dashboard, at the very least, identifying what these metrics are that you're looking at, that you're essentially grading yourself against, that you at least have some path for your team members to understand what success, in the organization's eyes look like, to be able to make adjustments, I think is incredibly important. These dashboards, obviously, we've talked a little bit about maturity, but generally, like, we start to see these dashboards, and especially a daily update, just the more mature that you get in your organization. But that starting point is definitely identifying those for yourself and then working your way towards it. So I don't want anybody ever feel like, oh man, daily, like, oh, I could never. Start small. Like, you can totally start small with this and just totally morph this and shape this into what does work for your organization.
Yep. And I've seen organizations where the folks are very dialed into their particular metric, and they would know, especially if it's on the production side, I need to create so much X. They know whether they're win or losing. And that gives them
Hmm.
an opportunity to pivot, as opposed to when we think of a traditional KPI report out, it could be monthly. So we're perhaps 6 weeks removed from the beginning of the previous month, no opportunity to change. And now at that point, we really can't change the trajectory as cleanly. So
That's right.
daily
Yep.
dashboards, highly recommend, weekly, right? Whatever it looks like. Then we talked about identifying issues and solving those issues, right? So there's two schools of thoughts on that one. There's team OKR, which is objective and key results. I included the book snapshots in there because I thought it was highly important, mainly because I like John Doerr's work, right? Measure what matters. But the concept of OKR is that you have an objective, and then it's supported by key results. And we'll go through an example in the next slide. But ideally the key results, whatever that result is, will drive that objective. Right. So that's the trick. None of these are easy in terms of how you formulate them, because your objective should be supported by the key results. But when you try to do examples in your head, it's very easy to get a little sideways on that one. But it works. I've used OKRs professionally, and it does give a lot of insight. And then again, as you go through the process, the first one's going to be a train wreck. The second one's going to be a little bit better. You'll finally get it dialed in over time. Then you have Team Rocks, which is from Traction. This was Gino Wickman's EOS response. So this one's a little bit different. They focus on a quarter. So there's tasks that have to be done immediately, but then issues that are going to take at least a quarter to complete, they identify them as rocks. So again, either version works. It's identifying an issue and creating a path to solve it, and creating accountability for anybody involved. So let's take a look at two examples. Why would we use OKR? Why would we use rocks? So on the team OKR side, our objective was to increase quarterly revenue by 20%, right? So this could be something that the leadership team has decided they want to accomplish over the next quarter, and how they're going to get there is by achieving these key results, right? And we think of them as, did you achieve 500,000 in new sales by the end of the quarter? These answers are going to be yes or no. So we don't create vague results. It's the result we're looking for, because if we achieve these results, then that's going to drive solving that objective that we laid out. So it could be, so we talked about new sales. Now this can be cascaded down to the sales team, that they need to work on the sales pipeline, fire up the biz dev model to ensure that we're getting those new sales, or depending on the length of the pipeline, it may have been earlier. We're also going to create opportunities for upsell and cross-selling strategies, right? So now that goal can be cascaded down to the team, because maybe we're not as aware of the cross-selling options that exist. But if we make a focused effort on, a key result will be increasing the average transaction size by 15% through these. Now that's something we can all focus on, and by achieving that, it's going to drive our objective. And then we talk about lowering churn rate. And this is where it gets tricky, because the key results, you really have to understand the objective and what can move the objective. So in this case, when the person did this, they said, okay, these are the factors that play into it. And now my key results can be assigned, and somebody can focus specifically on that, and their efforts can be spent on upselling and cross-selling. And if we do that, then we're going to be successful at the greater limit. Then if we roll over to Team Rocks, this rock was launch a targeted marketing campaign to drive new customer acquisition. Generally, it starts with, there's an issue that exists in the business. We create a rock to solve that problem. It's going to be in the next 90 days, because rocks are quarterly, but they can roll. And there's always an owner. In this case, it's the marketing team. So their goals, and it kind of flows down, right? Identify the target audience, and they're going to accomplish that in the first 2 weeks. This ties in with the meeting cadence, because if you have an L10 meeting every week, which is part of the Traction protocol, you would say whether your rock's on or off. And then if it's off, what can the team do to help you accomplish it? But if you follow each of the steps and you build out the rock correctly, then ideally you'll achieve success at the end. So either one works. It really is what works best for that company. But using either one, you've identified the issues, now you're focused on solving them, and this creates that level of accountability, because it's visible the team is aware of what people are working on. And this also allows really great delegation opportunities because you're pushing this down to other levels, but they're aware of how it rolls up. So you can definitely have cascading goals that arise out of this. Okay. So we've been on our journey. We've talked about go-to-market strategy, which is primarily marketing. We've talked about the business operating system. Again, that's building the framework out there that we can operate within. Now we're going to get into the VCFO tools, which is where one would think, right, that the folks, the CPAs and us all want to reside. And I'm going to start out, there's a lot of stuff out there, but forecast is absolutely critical if you want to change the picture of the, weird, who knows where this little road's going into a clearly defined highway. So a couple of terms to level set here. We start out with, we have a budget or a plan, the strategy. We'll use those words interchangeably. At its core, though, those are more long range planning tools. So we can say, if we're going to do a 3-year, a 5-year plan, what we're really trying to solve there is what are the strategies that we need to put in place. So if we go back to our beginning example of we want to increase EBITDA, it could be that when we've done the analysis, we look at our current revenue stream and we decide, you know what, we can't get to where we want to go from here. So we need to bring in a new service offering. So what would that look like? And we start walking that one through. Or we need to go with a lower cost of production, right? So maybe we look at nearshore, the production as our capacity starts to get taxed. We're going to look for an offshore solution. But it's strategy, it's focus, it's where we're going to play, what we're going to do. So it's market and product all over again. The forecast, though, is more dynamic, right? And we'll transition all the words and all the strategies into numbers, right, through economic drivers. But the dynamic forecast is where we take the budget. So we're drawing to the end of the year. We've got budgets out there for the next year. Those budgets will be truly dialed in for about 3 hours after they're all agreed on. And from that point forward, the world changes, right? So what we can do with a dynamic forecast is we can reflect that, constantly update it, and make changes to it so that we don't get ourselves completely pulled away from where we thought we were going to end up. So when we look at the informed decision making, absolutely. It really puts a pressure on us to be very thoughtful about what we're going to do, right? And how do we know if we're winning or losing? Well, we look at the variance analysis, and we've got some great example to kind of walk through that one. But as we go through the forecast, right, and this is to start out the conversation, it was, hey, might business owners not want to do that? They don't want to commit something in writing because we don't know what the future holds, right? I've heard that many, many, many times, especially if you want to have real fun, then you get into forecasting foreign currency, right? I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow, but you want me to forecast it for 5 years out. But there are things that we do know. And the key is, it's not that we have to be right. We have to make an assumption. We have to establish our assumption, and then we have to provide a countermeasure to it if necessary in order to offset the negative effect of it, or we need to enhance it if it's a good news story. So when we're doing forecasting, this is our opportunity to say, these were our 17 assumptions that we had in our heads when we did this, and if all these things happen, this is a potential outcome. Right. And that outcome is because it's a 3-year window, or could be 5, it lends itself towards long-term sustainability because it tells us whether we're going in the right direction or the wrong direction. But then that dynamic piece of it means that we're changing it and continually updating it, so we have a much better vision of what's going on in the world around us. And we don't find ourselves kind of sitting out there going, man, I didn't expect this thing to happen. And now it's too late to make an actual decision. We're reacting. So if you want to be more proactive, the best thing you can do is start getting into a regular cadence on not only budgeting, but the dynamic forecast inclusion as well.
What I found is whenever we hit those obstacles, a lot of times, if we have not had any kind of line of sight to that or had any dynamic conversation around those things that are just constantly changing, the decisions start to become very emotional, and especially whenever it starts to involve people. So what's incredibly important about forecasting is that if we can have visibility into that, we can scenario play, we can talk through the levers and the triggers of what's going to happen if this does happen, then we remove that emotion out of it if it does actually happen, because we've already talked walked through it. We already understand what the implications are. And so we've at least mitigated that piece of it that just starts to feel really heavy. I'm sure all business owners have made very emotional decisions because you just had to react in that moment to it. So that is just to reiterate and just to add more color to what James is saying. Just it is so incredibly important to get into a forecasting cadence.
Right. And that's some great points because the longer you're aware of something and can plan for it, the better off you're going to be because you've looked at uh, possibilities that you've had more time to really dwell on those possibilities, which is huge. So in our forecasting model example, right, I deliberately put the income statement in the background, right, behind the balance sheet, and we'll talk about the income statement first. Most of us are very familiar with income statement forecasting. Most of the time it's done on an annual basis, right? I'm sure we've all had the experience of, well, what did we do last year? Add 10% on the revenue side, take off 2 points on cost, and same, and that's their idea of a budget. We've all been there. But there's a way to get more refined. And I'll say calendarization is the last step in it. So first we'll do an annual cut where we look at this current year. What do we think of the next couple of years are going to be? We'll get those dialed in. Then we'll calendarize it because then that's where we're looking for if we have a slack period, well, then we can start to get more detail. But this is showing it at a calendarized level, but that's way down the road. But you note that this is built based on drivers. Right. We talked about the drivers on the front end. The more you understand your business, how is it that we make money? The more refined your forecast is going to be, the better your forecast is going to be within reason. So we'll give it the kind of the air quotes there. So in this example, they make money through selling billable hours at a bill rate, right? So we identify the billable hours, and if we cheat and look down to the next section where we talk about the number of teammates, this is under cost of goods sold. So we've got the number of teammates. We know how many hours the teammate is paid in total, right? We have a utilization rate, which allows us to say of that total hours, this is the amount that will be billable, right? And we know how many weeks are in a month, and we know how many hours in the total hours for the year and so forth, so we can build up the capacity for each one of those individuals. Now we go back up to the revenue side and say, for the team, this is what our billable hour total looks like. This is based on a team that we have, right? Then we add the bill rate, because if we generate a billable hour, we sell that billable hour, and then that gives us our gross revenue. Then we factor in if there's going to be write-ups or write-downs. So the write-down can be if we do work for the client, but we're not actually going to get paid for it. Our revenue goes down, but the billable hour doesn't, and that's going to depress our average bill rate. So that'll give us a pretty good snapshot of where we are for the year. Now, what we can do is when we look at that, we can compare it against prior year and see, does it make sense? Is it a good fit? But we can do the analysis on that later. The second piece on the cost of goods sold is we know what the teammate size is. Then we can look at the cost per teammate. Then we look at the margin. And now we can start to assess on the gross margin side whether we're in good shape or not. So in this, I deliberately put in half two, we were going to do a price increase. So we knew there were going to be merit increases in the second half of the year for the team. So we had to put in a price increase in order to cover that, as well as some of the higher costs that we may be incurring in the business. So by doing this at this level, again, now we're breaking it out into by month, we can see the true effect. And we also give ourselves a template that we can compare our actual results against those individual months. Most of us, again, are very comfortable with this at a high level. And the more detailed we get with our drivers, now we can start to test and discuss all of those. What if we changed from a utilization rate? What if we increase that utilization rate? What would that look like? So I have some clients that do 40 hours of work and they do 32-hour billable expectation every week. So it's an 80% utilization. We can talk about what if they were to increase the utilization rate, right? In terms of what that would look like for the teammate. Is that going to fit in with the core values? Is it going to fit in with the team? How much, where's the value in that? We can start to assess the pieces. But having a drivers based model for the forecast is where we start to really understand we're not just guessing at numbers. There's actually something behind it that supports it. Then on
And
the
one
balance sheet,
thing
good. Go
that I
ahead.
also want to point out just about those numbers in terms of especially what you see in revenue is that there's some pretty big swings and fluctuations in the revenue, especially given the amount of available billable days that you can work in a month. So traditionally, like November and December, like a lot of times we'll have less. In this example, maybe in May, because maybe a lot of people are taking vacation, there's just less billable hours to be able to work because of holidays. You can plan for that. You have line of sight into what that means from a cash perspective, which is where you're going to go now in terms of the effects of that on the actual balance sheet. But there are just some really big curves in that revenue whenever you start to look at it like this that you can have some line of sight into.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And again, the more sophisticated you get, now we're getting into what system do you want to track that, right? So the more we're making assumptions, we're clarifying the assumptions so that we remember it. It's just not we're throwing numbers on a page and saying close counts, right?
Mhm.
But then we get to the balance sheet, and this is where most folks fall a little bit short. It's easy to forecast on an income statement. The balance sheet's a little bit more complex because you really need to understand how all the pieces and parts work. But I'm focusing on cash because at the end of the day, that's really what we're driving towards. We want to drive it to a cash number. We want to know if we're going to be cash short or if we're going to have excess cash. And if we take the balance sheet example, go all the way over to December for the last line of cash, right? We've got our number. The first line up is our tax reserve. Okay. A tax reserve, we're building in that tax reserve to ensure that at the end of the year, the profits that are going to flow from and we're assuming S Corp, so it's going to flow into the owner, but we're assuming that we have the cash available to pay for those taxes. Now, our tax professionals are going to say you'd actually be making estimated payments throughout the year, and I get that. But the important thing is that you've reserved for the tax effect. The worst thing you can do is end the year and at that point have the thought about, okay, so how do I pay my taxes next year? Right. So we're including that in the forecast and saying you need to include a reserve for taxes. Now the next lineup is a cash reserve. We need to include a reserve for just general cash. So it can range anywhere from 10% to 20%, possibly even 30%, right? If depending on what we want to have cash on hand. But this is the cash above and beyond the operating cash to ensure that if we have a downturn in business, if a significant customer leaves, we're still in good shape, right? So when we build that into our forecast, we're driving towards those numbers. We have an expectation of where we want to be. Now we've got a plan, right? And then we can start seeing if we want to achieve these, we need more revenue. And if we need more revenue, right, then how do we go about getting this? And then that opens up the whole discussion of where is our pipeline relative to what we're actually suggesting. In this case, we're saying we need to drive to these numbers. But then that's a whole new discussion of pipeline. What is my go find? How does that all work? So when we think about forecasting, ensuring that it rolls into the balance sheet is hugely critical to get back to our cash number. And then again, anything with a driver, we can forecast. And the more we understand the business, the more sophisticated we want to get. We have tools to do that. So now that we've created our plan, we talked about the value of having it by month. There's a lot of different charts up there that can show you how to represent the information, whether it's forward looking or backward looking, the different things we can look at. But the one I really want to focus on is the variance analysis, which is kind of forefront here. So in our example, our service revenue, the forecast was $220,000. Our actual result was 186. We missed it by $34,000. Knowing that we missed it by 34 is important because we missed it, but understanding why we missed it is even more important. And we typically look at volume and rate. And I'll qualify, sometimes we include price and mix, but this is just at a very simplistic level, volume and rate. So how do we get there? So in the analysis section, we look at the difference in our service revenue. We can see that's the difference of 34,000. Then we look at billable hours because that's going to drive our volume. We had planned to do 1,600 billable hours. We did 1,500, so we were off by 106 billable hours. The cost to the business of that is going to be the forecast average bill rate, which is $135. So by missing those 106 hours, we could not bill at $135 an hour. That cost us $14,000. For the rate side, right? And this is where if we look at the bottom, we targeted 135 in our forecast. We actually came in at 122. That times the the variance in billable hours, that's worth $20,000. So we know the 34,000 miss had two pieces to it. Volume was 14,000 of it, but rate was 20,000. That rate could be because we had a lot of write downs in that month, i.e., we did the work, the billable hours were expended, but we didn't get any revenue for it. And that's going to drive down that average bill rate. So that would give our team something to look at where we could be very specific about it. The volume piece could be the discussions then could center around was it a pipeline issue where we just didn't have work? Alternatively, were we diverting people to internal projects to get more bang from that one? So using that analysis, we can get very specific about what we want to do with the business in terms of improving it. We talked about utilization, right? And utilization is simply the billable hours over your total hours, and you can move the utilization rate to get a better result. So that's in an example. So I call this the heat map. And effectively, it looks at utilization across the top, billable hours going up and down. For this business on a weekly profitability, the impact, we break even at the 64% utilization of the 262 billable hours. What this graphically shows, and you could share this with a teammate, would be if we increase our utilization, what is the economic impact in 1 week? So if we want to change from, hey, we work 40 hours a week, we have utilization of 32 hours, that's 80%, or realize that falls out of the scope on this one. But if we bump from 80 to 90% utilization, what would that look like, right? So in this case, it's a diagonal move because billable hours increase and utilization increases. But what if we say we're going to give everybody a half day off in the summertime to go spend time at the beach? So we take 4 hours of total time out, but we still keep our billable hour expectation the same, right? So now we're increasing our utilization, but we're not changing our billable hours. We're still doing 32. So this has been found to be effective for teams understanding, what is that impact? Because it goes back to the why. What can that individual teammate do? And what is the impact that can result from that? And this is all based on the math that supports the particular business. But again, as you seek to understand what's deeper in the business, now you can have impactful conversations with the team about what happens if we change the utilization, or what happens if we change the bill rate? What does that look like? It can also be used to see, can we take time out to shut down over the holidays, right? What impact would that have on the business? So at the end, again, we've talked about our journey here. Man, the time flies when you're having fun, right? But
It does.
at the key is we want to build a business that can endure all the challenges, right? That's why we've got the reserves. That's why we want to be able to look around corners, note the road in this case, a lot more clarity. We can actually see where we're going. We got a little sign telling us what's to come. But go-to-market strategy, critical. Business operating system, critical. And then using good financial tools to analyze and start discussions on what we can do to make things better, highly critical. Build stability within the team, right? And that goes back to the people analyzer, building that team to allow the business owner to work more on the business rather than in the business. So I probably could have shortened this whole thing by just saying get a map, right, from a trusted partner, but there you go.
Well, it was a great conversation and a very timely conversation, especially as we go into 2025, as we are starting to think about what the map should look like for our businesses. This has been such a great conversation. So thank you so much, James, for coming on and sharing some of your wealth of knowledge with us. Some of y'all may be thinking, oh my gosh, that was a lot. Maybe I just need to sit down and think a little bit deeper about that. Well, we have a free tool that we'd love to offer you, which is the free forecasting booklet. You can scan this QR code that you see on the screen. If you have registered for this webinar, you will get a copy of these slides. So don't worry about trying to grab this right this second. If you need to just grab that later, you totally can, and we can get you that. Also, we would love for you to subscribe to our newsletter. Different CFOs within our organization typically write articles there and just share what's going on within the industry. And then you'll also get updated when we have these webinars. So highly suggest that you join and subscribe to our newsletter. We also have a creative agency success show podcast, which we've had so many great guests on there. I tend to fill in for Jody sometimes. I mean, I just say I have better hair than him at least, and I don't wear the Hawaiian shirt, but every now and then I'll get on there, and I've been very, very lucky to get to have some really cool conversations that are just so relevant to business owners within the creative agency space. And if you've listened to this and you're like, I don't know that I have the mental capacity to figure these things out, and it is just tough, and that sounds like a lot, we are here to help. We want to talk through this with you. We'd love to just have a free virtual CFO consultation with you just to see if maybe we can help, or maybe just at least point you in the right direction of some resources. We'd love to initiate that conversation with you. So you can scan that QR code and just request that consultation. But regardless, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. If you're live with us and if you're watching the replay, please let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again for joining me, James.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.